never, never, never.
You and I have the courage to say to our enemies, there is a price we will not pay. There is a point beyond which they must not advance.
Socialists don't like ordinary people choosing, for they might not choose socialism.
We cannot afford to be so politically correct anymore.
Conservative One.
With George Christensen.
Don't you love that intro with President Trump saying we can't afford to be so politically incorrect or correct anymore? We can afford to be politically incorrect, and we are on this show. I'm George Christensen, host of Conservative One, the podcast defending traditions and freedoms. And today we've got a great show. I want to introduce our guests and get straight into it because I'm talking to two alt media personalities, David Pellowe from The Good Source, which Conservative One, the podcast, is hosted on and powered by, and also Rod Lampard from the Caldron pool. So we're doing the wonders of live streaming at the moment, and I'm just Dave's actually bringing him in. He's controlling it all from the Good Source bunker today. So we're in his hands, ladies and gentlemen. And but it's great to have you both, Dave and Rod, on this first live stream of Conservative One. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having us on, George. It's been a long time. Don't know what took you so long.
That's right. Well, look, as I said, we'll get straight into it. I'm going to start with you, Dave. Can you tell me a little bit about your background and, more importantly, about why The Good Source?
Why the initiative or why the name?
Well, both. Let's go through the initiative, and the name's pretty quirky but cool. So tell us about all of that.
Well, my background. Look, I've got a very, very, very blue collar, very diverse background. If you gave me one consistent theme throughout all of my background, it would be sales and marketing. I've done lots of different jobs which didn't involve that. I've been in the army. I've been in the fitness industry. I've been in mortgage finance. I've been in plumbing, digging ditches. I've been selling new Holdens. I could name others, heaps and heaps and heaps. So lots of experience and diverse experiences is what I mean, as opposed to, 10, 20, 30 years of 1 year's same experience. Yeah. But when I got, I started just getting involved in politics gradually, accidentally, very much, and then I ended up having some success in some local leadership, running a state electorate campaign for a very safe Labor seat, being involved in the central planning team for a federal electorate campaign. And then being on the state executive of the Family First Party, a minor, very conservative party, heavily populated by Christians and really strong, classically conservative of policies. And then I basically saw, through so much intimate involvement with the details of executing political influence, of just how unengaged voters were generally, how uninterested they were, especially people like me, people who went to my type of church. And, we're not typically very nominal. We're typically very passionate about our faith. It's a 7-day-a-week kind of life-changing thing. And yet, for some reason, it has very little impact on our political influence. And that became really starkly aware to me at I think the second last federal campaign, when I really contrasted the lack of activity, the lack of interest from Christians with those religious people who'd passed by the Good Samaritan in Jesus's parable of that name, the Good Samaritan. They didn't pass by the Good Samaritan. They passed by the guy who was beaten up and in a lot of desperate need. But it was a stranger from the neighboring region of Samaria who invested his time, invested his effort, invested his money, and he took a long-term interest in meeting the needs of a neighbor he'd never met before. And it was a complete stranger. And that to me spoke of the demonstration of love it is to be involved in politics and care about 25 million other people besides yourself, to not be bought by pork barreling, and to not be flippant with, que sera, sera, whatever, my vote doesn't count, but to actually get in there and do the best you can to change the fortunes and fates of the most vulnerable, the most at risk, and the most exploited in our nation. And so that's how I got involved in politics.
So where does the good source come into that?
Well, when I saw how unengaged people were, I essentially thought, look, handing out flyers and begging them to join a party isn't working. They actually don't have enough information to make a good decision. And so information is the business that the good source is in. And so I think it's now close to 4 years ago, I pretty much started thinking I need to start educating people like me, not in a condescending way, but in sharing what I'd learned on the inside, and sharing what I knew about how that matches up with Christian ethics of loving your neighbor and not doing it for yourself or for power, but for others, sacrificially, despite what you might want for yourself. And so educating people in both of those. But, on the other hand, educating people who aren't like me and don't know anything about the Bible or about God, there's an ability to lead them from evidence back to biblical truth. When those two things are in perfect concert and agreement, you don't have to be a believer to do the right thing. Like, surely all of us know you shall not murder. And there's really good evidence for that in anthropology and sociology and history, across religions, across jurisdictions and legal traditions. Whether you believe in the God of Exodus or not, you agree with the sixth commandment, you shall not murder. And so there's lots of good policies and laws which we can advocate if we just examine the evidence, the data, the logic, the reason, the history, the sciences, all of these things. And honestly, I'm prepared to change my mind if quality science and quality arguments contradict the word of God. And I have extreme confidence that it won't, because I think good information actually comes from there. But I'm prepared to be intellectually honest about that discussion and debate. And so the good source is an evolution and a growth in the way I started for the first 3 years. I just started by myself with my own platform called Pellowe Talk and channel, and I've been speaking in lots of non-Christian seminars and meetings, and the occasional church pulpit and Christian meeting. I started an annual Christian conference to teach these truths and to help people just get more informed and more involved in helping their neighbors, making the nation better.
State.
Thank you. Yeah, that's the Church and State Summit, held in the last weekend of February every year in Brisbane. Website by the same name, churchandstate.com.au. And the good source is now the current stage of that growth, where one voice isn't enough, but let's add as many voices as possible. Give them videos, give them podcasts, give them a platform to actually speak like yours. It doesn't need to be about religion. It doesn't need to exclude religion, but it just needs to advocate good policy, good philosophy, and allow room for disagreement.
Yeah. Let's go to Rod. Rod, can you tell me a little bit about your background and how the Caldron Pool came into being, and tell us a little bit about what Caldron Pool's about?
Well, Caldron Pool started a few years ago. Myself, I linked up with Ben about in 2018. So I came out of the 2017 same-sex marriage debate, giving my opinions on that, and sort of developed from there. As far as my involvement in politics goes, and that sort of stems from my work at Caldron as a store manager. I interacted with a lot of people over a 12-year period, and that showed me a lot about different kinds of personalities, the different kind of beliefs and ideologies that are out there, particularly in how ideologies are taking over theology in the church, and how the churches are surrendering theology to the ideology, particularly leftism. And I saw that in 2007, with Cabin 07, hashtag movement, that was that blew me away, especially when I was watching the ABC. And I think my passion, that really triggered my passion at that point to just move on into the area and show a lot more interest, because of what I saw was fake media, fake news. There was this collective narrative, call it an organized myth, if you like, about the Iraq War, for example, which is backed up by Melanie Phillips in her book, Upside Down, World Turned Upside Down. I went from there, and it got to the point where I just I needed to move on from Koorong. So I did a degree in ministry and theology through Tabor Adelaide, which was awesome. And then sort of focused on political theology, found my jam, if you like, and went into that from there. Did a minor in church leadership, and then homeschooled for a little bit, and still am doing that, as well as working with Ben and Caldron Pool and making sure we do that. And so I think Caldron Pool, like Good Source, with what Dave is doing, we're trying to be a better alternative, and not just be a better alternative, but be the better alternative that's out there, I think. And there's obstacles to that, because you end up sort of overlapping sometimes, and then there's some competition that comes in. And I think that's one of the challenges for a lot of the uprising conservative voices in Australia. And as Dave pointed out, I think that the level of attention Australians have for politics has always been very low, and their tolerance level for garbage, I think, if it's not Hollywood, there's a lot of garbage that come from Hollywood, and a lot of people put up with that, but it's more tolerated than garbage from politicians, I think, because it affects their lives in a more deep way. We're more about sport than we are religion or politics in this country, and it's very hard to engage with people in a conversation. And so I think that Caldron Pool, and I guess the Good Source now add to that and encourage that as much as possible. And I can't really improve on what Dave said about the theological aspects of conservatives in the media, and especially Christian conservatives. But I think there's a real place for that voice, and it's one that is necessary and should be welcome at the table of ideas, because I think that the Bible itself is an objective word spoken to humanity as far as the revelation that we have from God in that, and that confronts us in our reality, it confronts us in our sickness, our suffering. It's a word of hope, a word of salvation, a word of peace, a word of restoration, and a word of liberation. And I think that, when you have these competing narratives that are all around the place, it's comforting to have this one word that's spoken, and you can go to it and understand that it's a revelation from God. It's not coming from human imagination or ideas or again, ideology. It's something that can conflict with it or even make it feel uncomfortable. So, I think that's one of the things about sermons. Good sermons will rock you. It won't make you feel comfortable. And that's a confrontation with the truth. And then we talk about fake news, we talk about truth. We've got to have some point where we go, okay, move on from this idea that truth is subjective, and get back into the reality of things. I teach my kids a lot that today's spectrum of thought could call a chair a dolphin, and you've got to agree with that person that chair is a dolphin, right? And affirm them in that belief. And then one of my sons said, well, let's throw it in the river and see if it swims. And it's testing that theory. I guess you can have that belief. Let's test it, see if it works. But you can't throw it in the river, the chair, because it's offensive and intolerant, and be locked up and fined and cancelled and all that stuff. So as far as critical thought goes, and that, I think Caldron Pool and the Good Source are great alternatives, and they're up and running and rising stars in that way. So that's where I'm at with those things, and I think we need to test the garbage, filter out the silly, and keep a hold of the sacred.
Yeah. Well, I might bring you both back in to the video. Thank you very much, Maestro, Dave. And what we didn't get to was names. Why the Good Source, Dave? Just quickly, and then we'll get into the meat.
It was actually James McPherson's son's ideas. believe it or not. It was
There you go.
something close to that anyway.
Who's one of your contributors, I should say.
Yeah, so he's one of the contributors. So I think I passed the hat around for good ideas as we were getting ready to launch, and I was just talking to a few folks, and I was just saying, let's come up with some good names. And here's what we didn't want. We didn't want something that was exclusive of nations outside Australia, and we wanted something that didn't take itself too seriously either. Had a bit of, there's a bit of Aussie larrikinism reflected in, I guess, the pun. The good source is a bit of a colloquialism for good information, good fun, good times, something that's, help me out if I'm not using the right synonyms there, but
you've got it.
Good. And then obviously source spelt with a different spelling, with an OU instead of an AU, is
other way around.
It's the source of news and information. So we are playing a pun on that. We want to be a source that is good. And so one of the things that we clearly do is differentiate between opinion and news on the good source, and we just call it that. Opinion will be categorized as opinion, and just about all of our videos and podcasts are opinion.
And so it's quite quirky. So is Caldron Pool, and there's a reason for asking this line of questioning. Why Caldron Pool, Rod?
And you'd have to ask Ben for a deeper answer for that. But basically, it comes from Chronicles of Narnia, and it reflects reflects Aslan. Aslan being the obviously the representation of Christ in the Narnia series, and truth, and how that truth is something we can grab a hold of, and it'll always be sort of a flawed reflection. We can see that it's like a signpost pointing to what is to come, and the hope we have in that. So it's never a joyless engagement with the culture in that respect. So that's Cauldron Pool to me, and I think it's kind of an edgy title, and it's unique and it stands out. So.
It is great. So, firstly, just before we go on, just want to say good day to Trevor and Lindsay and Pam and all of our listeners who are joining in. If you want to ask a live question or make a live comment, you can, and we might flick that up on the screen and talk about it. But I noticed that, Go ahead.
I actually like Pam's note here that a lot of the encouragement and good information that she's getting is from US friends, and that's why it's really important to support Australian voices like Cauldron Pool and the Good Source, is because there's actually a lot of money in the United States for media and ministry, and nobody does that for money in Australia.
Everyone's operating off an oily rag, I guess.
It's very hard to support a family on this kind of thing. So get behind them.
And it's interesting, Rod, you said before that the way that you're you pointed out a truism, and that is that most Aussies couldn't care less about politics. They're more interested in sport or the latest trends. But I noticed that with both of the sites here, the Good Source and Cauldron Pool, there's a degree of irreverence in terms of how we're dealing with some of these hot button issues. You find that engages more Aussies? Rod?
I think that it's hard. It's a hard line to walk. I mean, you don't want to be tabloidy, and headlines are an industry that you've got to be really careful with, because, as I say a lot in comments, the amount of people who read the headline and not the actual article itself can be really frustrating. And you got to remind people, just, hey, go and read the article, don't just comment on the headline. It's shoddy kind of intellectual responses that make the work a little bit more frustrating and a little bit harder, because then you've got to spend a lot more effort trying to encourage people to actually go and read what you've written, rather than just subjectively respond to the headline. I don't know where Dave stands on that, but that's one sort of obstacle.
Yeah. Well, just now get into the meat of the issue. I guess that the need for sites like yours really does come down to the fact that we have such, just like in the US, we've got such a fake news mainstream media. And I don't use that term lightly. In the last decade, I have just seen reports. Last decade, I've been in politics. I was actually elected 10 years ago. Basically today. Today's a Saturday, so 10 years ago today. So
Happy
10 years
anniversary.
in politics. Thank you very much. Yeah, well, that or commiserations, one of the two, because over that decade, I've seen just so much fake news. I could go through a list of different articles where what has been purported to be the truth has been anything but. And this is what we get from...
You're a classic target for fake news, George.
Well, not just me, and I don't want to go into
I know, but,
fake news regarding myself, but I'm
it's
talking
a
about
really
even
good
in general.
example of how... okay, let's not talk about you. One of the classic examples of fake news that I love, it's like straight to the pool room, reasons why we exist, posted on the Good Source support request for support page. And that's an actual screenshot from CNN where the headline is President has 2 scoops of ice cream. This is the tape. And see, they would say it's not fake news because it actually happened. It's true. It's accurate. And I would say it is fake news because it's not fair. It's not balanced. And what you've done is you've taken an event at the White House and you've ignored all of the content, all of the substance, all of everybody who was present, all of the policy, and you've isolated on the single thing you could find that suited your narrative: orange man bad, very bad orange man. And that was that President Trump had 2 scoops of ice cream when everybody else had 1 as per the menu.
Yeah. Well, look,
it's just ridiculous. It's unreliable. If you're listening to a news outlet like that, you're not getting what happened.
Yeah. And look, it still definitely is fake news. I mean, they set the narrative, they pick and choose which are going to be the issues of the day. This doesn't come from the public. It comes from editorial rooms in major media outlets across the country. And it's just interesting, let me say something very controversial, unlike myself. If there was a mass shooting in Australia, we'd probably have the media react and talk about how we need more gun control. Whoa! Who's got the truck rolling past the house?
Wasn't me.
What we wouldn't get is a discussion on capital punishment, and both would be legitimate outcomes of such an incident, legitimate topics to talk about. But we'd only get one from the mainstream media, I can guarantee it. Yeah. And therefore it would only be one public discussion going on. So that's what you're talking about. I'm also saying, I'm going to double down here and just say I've seen fake news from the very beginning of my political career, which was actually not in federal politics, but in local government. I can remember when I was on Mackay Regional Council and Mackay City Council, actually going back almost 15, 16 years ago, when there was a land claim by a local Indigenous group over nearly all of Mackay. And I made some statements on it. I said that I thought that it was a waste of time and energy on behalf of the local Indigenous community, and that really what needed to be focused on was more educational opportunities, more employment opportunities for particularly young Indigenous people. And that is what I would be focused on, and that is what I thought the local Indigenous leaders should be focused on. The ABC wrote up a report on that, and the way that they styled my comments, which were almost verbatim what I just said, was that Mr. Christensen said that they shouldn't focus on land rights but on getting a job and getting educated. I thought, unbelievable. So you could say that indeed that was true.
Fake news.
But I got to say, it's fake news. That's not what I said. And this happens to conservatives over and over and over again. There are
it's probably fair to say fake news is while possibly technically accurate or not, it's bad faith reporting.
Yeah, indeed. And we know where it stems from. And I'll bring you into it, Rod, in a second, but we know where it stems from. I mean, there was a survey done of newsrooms across the country and journalists in terms of their political leanings. And I think it turned out something like the vast majority of them supported Labor, and the second party that they supported was the Greens. And it was like an overwhelming, I can't remember the figures, but 80%.
It was something like, I think it was something like 3 or 4 times population average Green supporting.
So we wonder why we got a problem. And I went through journalism. I studied that at university.
Indoctrination camp?
Yeah, well, actually, it wasn't so much because we had some pretty good lecturers. One of them, though, was Labor to the Bootstraps, but he did not bring that across in his lectures. So that was pretty good. And I find those ones that are actually open and honest about it normally don't. But I went to Central Queensland University, which is a regional area, conservative sort of place, so you probably weren't going to get that. But I got to say that in the sociology lectures, sadly, that I wasted my time on doing, the first lecture that we had for political sociology, the lecturer actually, this is 1996, just after the election, where Howard had a thumping win, asked the class, who here voted for the coalition in the last election? Well, everyone sort of looked nervously at each other, and I thought, bugger it, I'm going to put up my hand. So I did, and then one guy saw me, and he put up his hand, and others sort of, their hands were twitching, but they decided not to do it. And the lecturer said, lecturer looked around the room, and he said, "Okay, 2." He said, "Well, I think that we can iron that out by the end of this series of lectures."
Dear me.
It's much worse nowadays. So there's indoctrination. Yeah. But Rod, you were gonna add something before on the issue of fake news. Go ahead.
Yeah, but I think it's the fact that half truths sell. I mean, half truths are a great grab for propaganda, and there's propaganda everywhere, but there's good and bad propaganda. There's the manipulative kind, which I think is dangerous, and it's almost an opiate. And when you have this kind of thing where even good news is bad news. So look at Donald Trump, for example, he brokered that deal with UAE and Israel. That's good news, but it's being reported as bad news by omission, basically. So I think that the fake news, not only are some things manufactured, but they're definitely created to steer the image or the stigma a certain way. To come back to sort of why I think Caldron Pool and good source are important is if you look at white nationalism, for example, I don't see that as a refuge, but there's a lot of white young people out there, especially young men, who are angry and frustrated, and they're going to be sucked into that ideology if there's no counterbalance to the left's, I would say the left's fake news in trying to create an enemy in order to justify legitimacy for their platform. You see that in the Democratic convention. It's just a hate convention, really. It's a whole clown show. And you see that there's no policy at all. It's just anti-Trump this, anti-Trump that. Well, it's what it looks like to me anyway. And I've said
Orange man bad.
What I said this on Facebook was like, it's more like a mockery of the people than a gathering of public servants keen to serve the people.
Yeah. Well, there's a great degree of Trump derangement syndrome that has infected the US media to the point of I've never seen anything like it. And, unfortunately, what it does lead to is Trump doubling down on some of the, on his commentary. And I think that inflames the situation. Brett Clark's got a nice little comment there. You might wake up on the screen, Dave. There you go. And I'm sure that there's a way that you can actually Dave's
Good Sauce and Caldron Pool.
Caldron Pool and the Good Sauce, and you've also got a website, Pellowe Talk, which is your particular program, or is it all filtered through the?
Yeah,
the
I've all rolled it into Good Sauce now.
Okay, and that was the germination for the Good Sauce was your program Pellowe Talk, which still goes on. Also got the subtitle Not Q&A, so it's a great show. When does that come on, Dave?
So that's live Tuesday nights, and actually, Rod may just have been the best panelist we've ever had. We need to get you back, Rod. So that was a few months ago now. We've done I think 21 episodes or so, and I've been doing Pellowe Talk for a long time, but Pellowe Talk Live hashtag not Q&A has been going for 21 weeks now. And the goal with that is really just to have a conversation that really is a salve, a healing balm after the aberration of journalism proposed by ABC the night before on not Q&A.
You're listening to Conservative Wine.
Well, yes, and I would say to people that you should stay off the ABC on Q&A night. Otherwise, you end up doing your television damage. I do. That's why I had to stop buying new television, so I had to stop watching it. Now, Rod, I've noticed you've got a gallery there of quite eclectic personalities on your wall.
I do actually.
One of them is a bit of a hero of mine, and that's G.K. Chesterton. I noticed him up in the top left corner of the screen that viewers will be looking at. And this just shows you, I've got a book here, The Universe According to G.K. Chesterton. So, and interestingly, it's got all of G.K.'s, those who don't know, G.K. Chesterton, he was a writer, a journalist, an author. I guess he wouldn't call himself a journalist. He would call himself an essayist. He was in England. He lived around the turn of last century. He was lecturing in Oxford in 1914. So this is sort of the era we're talking about. And he writes this is a series of definitions, a dictionary of mad, mundane, and metaphysical, according to G.K. Chesterton. And journalism, this is what he says. Journalism, his definition is writing badly on an enormous scale, the art of doing dull things in a hurry, a machine for multiplying and magnifying one small thing indefinitely, the art of pretending to know. And he describes a journalist as one who is vastly ignorant about many things, but who writes and talks about them all, a person who understands nothing except how to write about everything he does not understand. He goes on to describe the newspapers as a loud and regular organ by which our civilization daily proclaims that it has nothing to say, and the newspaper press is a machine for destroying the public memory. So we can see that as the world turns and as time goes on, nothing's new under the sun. There seems to have been a degree of problems and bias in the media for quite a long time. But I think that as we've gone down the trajectory that civilization has taken, we've seen that speed up and just become so much more intense. What do you think about GK's comments there, Rod?
I think he's right. I think it reflects what late British actor Christopher Lee said. There's actually a really cool YouTube video if you can check it out. Christopher Lee and the media. He said that look, the internet and the media, if they can't think of something to do, they'll invent it. He was commenting on someone asked him about his involvement in black magic, and he was 70s Dracula, I think. So he did have an interest in that black magic area. But he said someone said apparently that he had like libraries of books on it. And he said he's probably got 5 and dismissed it's just, again, fake news and this whole gossip kind of magazine trend that we're seeing in the mass media, and it's what I've written about called organized myth, based on what Jacques Ellul says in his book Propaganda, which is an excellent book if you can read it, if you want to read it. It's for free on archive.org too. So just
tell us the name of that book again.
It's called Propaganda by Jacques Ellul. He's a French philosopher, theologian. He was actually it's at one point a Marxist as well. So he's got a real deep understanding of the left and how the left thinks, especially I think today in its cult of leftism. There's a lot. I know there's some people on the left. I know some, and I've engaged with them, and one of them is my friend. I would consider one or two to be my friends. They've been sort of thrown left and to the extreme, and they've kind of come back to the center a little bit. And it just seems to be there's an identity crisis on the left, I think. And 2016 really, I guess I usually say it's not Donald Trump's election; it's Hillary Clinton's loss. Because that's really the issue. It's the fact she lost the election that triggered so much of this emotion and so much of this hate for Donald Trump. If he doesn't win in November, you'll probably see them cozy up to him again, and he'll be back on TV screens and doing something somewhere. And it'll be love again for Donald Trump, So it's this kind of manufactured hate, this manufactured narrative. And as I said before, the importance of Caldron Pool and good sources is to provide an antidote, I guess, for stuff like white nationalism and I guess ethnocentrism, things like that have a real grounding in a toxic kind of mix of things. And I think Fraser Anning was unfairly treated to some degree because of his people aligned him with that, especially the media. A good example of the egging he got because he was called a white nationalist, and the word he used, solution, in the speech he gave in the Senate. I mean, that was made up and loaded with Holocaust denial stuff, and it was poor form for the media to do that. But you're talking about a media who, since the Iraq War, has been essentially working together in how they get their story straight. I mean, Melanie Phillips said this, and it was really, really important to note this. She actually pinpoints, probably the first that I've read anyway, who pinpoints the arrival of fake media or fake news, and that was we went to Iraq, on a lie. We went to war in Iraq on a lie. Yeah, and she makes a really good point about that, citing people who have claimed that Saddam had weapons of mass destruction. And we don't want to revisit that debate, but there was a collective narrative, and then right up to 2007 in Australia, you see this used against John Howard to wear him down. And work choices was a big thing. Of course, there was a hubris in the LNP at that time, and they just probably got a little bit too cocky, a little bit too comfortable. But you just saw this. I just don't understand. If it was Donald Trump is so popular, everybody's loving Donald Trump in 2016, and it's Kevin 07 all over again. But it's okay. It was okay back then because it was Labor left, but not with Donald Trump. They're populist leaders like Kevin Rudd, for example. He's still trying to be that way. If you saw him on Twitter this week, for example, he's still trying to lead from behind, and instead of being, I guess, proactive and he's trying to ride the wave of sentiment that's coming through the media. And again, that organized myth that is agreed upon. So Black Lives Matter is another example. The media reluctantly reported on the murder of Canon Hinnant, and then they were called out by the conservative media, and then they go and report on it, like Washington Post, Democracy Dies in Darkness, go and report on it just because they've been triggered to have to do that. And then half the article is an attack on conservative media for calling the left media out. Again, it's like one rule for those who wish to rule us, and another for those who wish to rule. Yeah. Dead right, Rod.
Well, look, I think that, as I said before, the trajectory of decline in journalism and political bias in journalism has really sped up in recent times, particularly I think Trump derangement syndrome, as I said before, has been fanning the flames for the last 4 years. But this also stems from what we know to be the long march through the institutions. I touched on that before, saying universities. I'm sure that most young people that go to university to study journalism don't have so much of a leftist bias before they get there, but they certainly do by the time they get out. And what has happened with, I guess, so many different sources available for Australians to choose from, and people all over the world to choose from, in terms of the internet, the advent of smart TVs, and the link up you can do with YouTube and social media and other platforms on your smart TVs or your devices, which most people are probably getting their news from right now, their smartphones. What we've had is niches being carved out, and the mainstream media have gone after this. So, for instance, the US, things are pretty hyper over there, but CNN is basically an anti-Trump network. That's their niche. They style themselves as pretty much the opposition. So there is no way that you could get non-biased news reporting from CNN. There are examples of that in Australia. Look at the ABC. Look at largely the Fairfax Press. Look at The Guardian. These are organisations which are avowedly leftists. So it taints, the ABC might not say it's avowedly leftist, but again, I point to those surveys, and I can tell you what, the ABC would have skewed those results in that survey. So they certainly are leftist, and it taints their news reporting. And what we've seen more so from the mainstream media is a fusing of commentary with news. Once upon a time, you would, when you heard the commentary, you knew it was commentary. I dare you now, even go to a News Limited source, news.com.au. So everyone says News Limited's conservative. Go and have a look at news.com.au, their biggest online platform, and tell me if that is conservative. You will find that it's not. And what you will find is that news reporting on that site is completely and utterly infused with commentary. We are not just getting straight news. When I studied journalism, as I said. Introduction to Journalism 1A, I can recall, as journalists, we were instructed to do this. You write a news story. You write for someone of moderate sort of intelligence because you want to get something that might be deeply complex, explainable to someone who doesn't want to sift through all of the detail. But you've got to get it right. So it boils down to this: the who, what, when, where, and why. And if you want to go on, talk about the how after. We were told just the facts, ma'am, just the facts. You want to do opinion, then get into feature writing. And that's a very different thing. And as it is with broadcast, now they're fused and there's more of ability for complete and utter bias to slip in. And that's what we're seeing. So, it's and a lot of the stuff that we're seeing out there is low rent stuff. I mean, the media often commentating on themselves, which is just look at Insiders, for instance. I mean, what more of a pathetic show could you get than old hacks sitting around on a couch talking to each other about what old hacks are interested in? I mean, I do not watch that show. I do not watch it. It is as boring as the proverbial. So anyway, that's my rant.
To be fair to the ABC, I mean, they have called out Gavin Menzies' 1421, which the book that claims that China discovered Australia and how that's been supported by the Chinese government. That we did the kind of thing. It's been proven, kind of thing. But they did call that out as garbage. And the ABC has some good stuff. They do some good things, but.
Clock is right twice a day, so
that's right.
I don't give him much credence, mate. I don't give him much credence.
No, but you got to give credit where credit's due. So
I've got some friends who are ABC journalists, and I actually sometimes feel bad. Like I wouldn't want them to think I was maligning them because, you know, and fair enough, they're probably not on TV or print the radio, but
Yeah, I have friends that are in radio too, regional radio.
And like there are some let's me be fair. There are some of them who are incredibly balanced and hide their prejudices very well, and I know their prejudices. And you know what? Some of them that I'm talking about actually would be fairly centered, not too far left or right of.
Dave, they have to hide their prejudices. They have to hide it.
Well, that's the theory.
If they're from the if
they don't do it very well in general.
If they're from the conservative side of the ledger, they have to hide it. Let me tell you that in all of the complaints that I've ever heard about the ABC, the only time that I've ever personally been involved and seen a complaint upheld about media bias on the ABC was when I was interviewed by a regional radio reporter about the Adani project. And someone put in a complaint from an environmental group. And what they said was, basically, you didn't ask enough negative questions about it. And so therefore that was bias. That the reporter did not ask me enough negative questions
didn't
about
try
the
and
project.
hang you hard enough.
You know, so that is what the ABC would consider bias.
Yeah, and
that journalist got in trouble.
And they're led by the nose by such political pressure from the masters of rules for radicals, which are the ultra red communists. Environmentalists. So that was a real Freudian slip. I didn't mean that as a pun at all. Ultra red environmentalists. They're not green, but
they are.
I certainly did intend to imply they were communists, and then just accidentally said it. And yeah, they absolutely are. They're the worst of Marxists who are anti-nation, anti-family, anti-religion, and anti-capitalism. They're the worst. And for the national broadcaster to be led by the nose by their kind of complaints is indictable.
Nicole Thomas has put up a few comments here about the ABC in particular. I'm amenable to this line of arguments. I got to say, let me be completely and utterly honest here to Nicole and all of the other listeners who and viewers who have this view about the ABC being privatized or defunded. I would love it. You would love it. There's many other conservatives around the country that would love it. The problem is that it just would not. If I went and did a poll of the Australian populace, I know already the result would be no, that people don't want the ABC privatised or indeed probably defunded. Having said that, most people still don't watch the ABC. The people who would say, no, I don't want to do it, most of them would hardly turn it on. There is going to come a point in time eventually where this will have to be looked at. Just like it would be ridiculous for the government to go out and say we're going to buy or start a public newspaper. There is no reason right now why we have a public television channel.
So true.
There is no reason why we have a public radio station nationally. There is reasons why we would have local radio stations. I can understand that for the local news content. But, the old objective of promoting Australian culture, Australian drama, Australian arts, Australian news and views, there is a simple answer to that you beef up the requirements that you put into the free-to-air contracts. I mean, there is no right that Channel 7, Channel 9, Channel 10 or Win and all the others have to just stream free-to-air. They actually have to fulfill obligations. So beef up the obligations to ensure that all of that is happening through all of the other channels, and then we could save a whole heap of money and end the bias. I got to say that the bias in the ABC. Look, other channels and other outfits are biased. I named before, for instance, organs such as the Sydney Morning Herald and the Age and the Fairfax Media, and they're biased. I mean, the Guardian, they're biased.
Oh yeah.
Issue with them is they don't use my money to do it.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly right.
You know, I couldn't care if Caldron Pool suddenly was overrun by the green. Well, I could actually, but if you guys were green left, you're not using my money. But the ABC,
or if they
actually
are,
is.
you can turn it off.
Yeah.
And this is the beauty of the internet, of the democratization of media, and I think this is certainly my message: is you can't defund the ABC, but the question is, what can you do? And the answer is, you can put your hand in your pocket, flick $10 a month to Caldron Pool, flick $10 a month to The Good Source, flick $10 a month to Spectator, or whatever other free market solution is out there. You can't make the enemy smaller, but you can make your allies bigger.
I'll tell you what, perhaps we could get the government to make donations to new media outlets tax deductible. That might be an interesting
as long as there's
idea.
no strings attached.
Right.
You know what? I think I'm actually going to be idealistic. And I think I say this consistently with churches as well. Don't take government money. Don't take government benefits. Don't take government incentives. Let's be completely independent from them. Freedom of separation of church and state means the government stays out of our business. It means the government stays out of our business. And so the same goes with separation of media and state. Let them stay out of our business. We will absolutely hold their feet to the fire without fear when we've got nothing invested in their goodwill. This is how democracy works best, is when the voters and the media have a big stick and a big carrot. Do good, we will love you. Do bad, we will tell the world, and we will hold you to account, and we will fire you and hire somebody better.
Yeah.
Simple democracy.
Well, let me get to...
That includes the member for Dawson.
Yeah. Well, let me get to the final question that I want to ask before we wrap up. Now, there were proposals under the Gillard government. I think there were proposals in the UK that I'm not sure whether they were adopted, actually. But what it was about was media regulation or press regulation. You know, it was all trying to drive a dagger at Rupert Murdoch because, of course, there can only be bias in the media one way. If there isn't even a scintilla of bias in the other direction, then, you know, it's wrong. So governments were acting at that stage to try and do something about what they perceived to be conservative bias in the Murdoch press, News Limited or News Corp press. I was vehemently against it. There are some people, though, who have said in recent times on the conservative side of the ledger that the absolute and utter bias in the media, including in big tech companies like some that we're streaming on at the moment, you know, that inherent bias has got to be actually sorted out, because they are too big and ugly now to be able to just, you know, be trusted to do that on their own. What do you think about these proposals? I could probably guess yours. I'll start with Dave.
Can you ask that question again, just in 5 seconds?
Well, what I'm saying is that big tech companies, big news media, completely and utterly biased. There is growing calls for some form of regulation to ensure that they're not. Government-imposed mandate to ensure that they're not. What do you think about that?
Idealistically, I think private corporation, private property. But, you know, my honest answer is I'm probably torn, conflicted, and don't really know that I could take a dogmatic position one way or the other. I'm certainly sympathetic to the free market argument. Leave them alone and let the market come up with something better. But But then I also don't know that I've got a good argument against the monopoly laws, and I think cartel laws. I think they're getting awfully close to it, to a point that it's So I'm entertaining arguments. I'm open to debate on that. Again, my underlying principle is I champion the free market, and I don't think the free market is perfect, but I think it's the best bad system we've got. So acknowledging that it has flaws acknowledges that there is scope for minimal regulation in probably the truest reason for government's existence. Where that line actually is I think something that's highly debatable and a very worthy discussion.
Rod?
I think you've got to get to the root cause of the problem. I don't think that government regulation is going to be useful. I mean, you get to the level of education. Let's look at public schooling and curriculum. Let's look at critical theory in that. Let's look at intersectionality, all the stuff that's being taught that really is loading kids up with guilt and suspicion, a culture of suspicion and things like that. And we start there, you're going to have these issues sort of iron out in the future, and they're going to move into, these organizations and change the culture of them and change the ethos of them and bring back a balance, if you like. And in my opinion, the only antidote to fake news, the only antidote to bullying by the media or from the media through manufactured narratives or half-truths is dialogue. There's so much monologue, but the dialogue, we're really going to come back to that conversational aspect and sit around the table and try and discuss it. As you mentioned, Insiders is more like an echo chamber in some respects. It's not about dialogue. You can compare that to Outsiders on Sky News, for example, and you've got guys, they'll have anybody on pretty much, and that sometimes I get criticized for even doing that, whereas Insiders seems to be like a cliquey group, an elitist kind of bubble. I often say that the left tends to exist in this sinless bubble it creates for itself, a sense of self-righteous positioning, so that you criticize that, you're criticizing Christ, you're criticizing sanctity or the church in some respect, and that's reflected in Christian theology, which says that all have sinned and all have fallen short of the glory of God. We can come back to that level and rest on that and come back to that understanding that we're all on this sort of same level, I guess, in this respect. And we got to get back to dialogue and engaging in this, marketplace of ideas. And as I said, I don't think government regulation, because you know what, you guys are in power right now, but Labor could be next. And government regulation on media, what's government regulation? It's going to hit Caldron or Google source. So it's a two-edged sword, and I agree with Dave. It's kind of I'm not really sure about that. But my opinion is we've got to get to the source at the bottom of things, and that is deal with the curriculum, deal with the education. What's being taught, that as people have called out many times, cultural Marxism moving through the public schooling system. The us versus them mentality that they're being taught to hate the color of their skin because they're white and they have European heritage. This kind of toxicity has got to be addressed. When you address that from the ground level, and you start to bring dialogue back in and balance instead of a politics of grievance, and that's one of the things I think we see exhibited by the Democratic Conference this week, and even in debates about Australia Day, is this politics of grievance that education is being built upon, and the self-hatred that's being built, instilled in kids, especially I think kids with white melanin. It's going to backfire big time, and it's either the left manufacturing an enemy to stay legitimate, or it's this naive thought that, based on the intersectionality, spectrum, that there really is this oppression everywhere, and we've got to look under every rock for it and to beat it.
Well, we're almost reaching the hour, so I will wrap up here on this discussion on media bias and also new media, alternative media. Could I just ask both Dave and Rod to quickly give a plug to where people can go to support your websites, your news platforms? Dave, we'll start with you.
Thanks, George. So to become a supporter of The Good Source, to subscribe to email updates, to find all of our most recent videos, podcasts, and news and opinion articles, head to goodsource.news. That's SAUCE, goodsource.news. And to make donations, add /support on the end of that. So goodsource.news.
And Pam's O'Sullivan, I see, Dave, has also asked for a physical address. Is there a physical address that you have so people can donate?
I don't think it's on the website, our mailing address. But Pam, if you just shoot us an email through or message through any of the online channels, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, email, website, we'll definitely respond to you personally with a postal address.
Okay,
thank you very much.
Great. Rod, how can people go on and see and support the Caldron Pool?
Well, we're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and the website's caldronpool.com. And there are support links on there that people can go to vote us up.
Yeah, great. And are you on the new medium called Parler?
We are, yes. Also Pellowe, that's right, yes.
And I noticed The Good Source is also on Parler, as am I. I got to say, I haven't got into it as much as what I thought.
It's hard to use, isn't it?
They do need to improve it a little bit, but it's a good start to have a very unfiltered sort of page.
I've been on there for well over a year, and they haven't improved very quickly. I think we're crying out for it. Conservatives would. I mean, anybody right of Mao Zedong would flock to Parler if it just got a little bit more user friendly.
Am I saying it wrong? Am I not Parler? Yeah,
I don't know why they chose a French word that nobody would read phonetically the way it's said, but it's from the old word "shall we parley," which means to talk.
Yeah, BitChute is also one that's up and coming as an alternative to YouTube, but we won't say that because I think we're live streaming to YouTube. But anyway, all right. Disavow. I don't want my show cancelled. Okay. Thanks very much.
I think you're allowed to criticize YouTube. You're just not allowed to criticize Hillary or abortion.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for this, the first live streamed edition of Conservative One, the podcast defending tradition and freedom. It's been great to have Dave Pellowe from The Good Source and Rod Lampard from Caldron Pool with us. Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, man.
Bye.
We will decide who comes to this country and the circumstances in which they come.
We'll preserve for our children this, the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness.
You've been listening to the Conservative One podcast with George Christensen.